you want me to just go ahead and start?
Sorry, I had
Please.
myself on mute. Yes, please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. Sister Palmer, could you allow me to share my screen, please?
Yes. Okay, I think you can share. Go ahead and try.
Let me try it now. It says it's disabled.
Okay, sorry. Okay, now try it.
Ah, there it goes. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let me see if I can. Okay, there we go. Get it in the right spot. Okay, so I want to welcome everyone who came. Oh, are we going to record this also?
Yeah, I already started it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as disciples of Jesus, we want to be able to minister to those who are having a hard time and who are mourning. And it's part of what we covenant as we get baptized, that we'll mourn with those that mourn. But this can be a real challenge. I don't know of anyone that this is like really super easy for them to do. I've found that it's been hard for me, even though I've experienced grief. I still have to, work at it. So because of that reason, I thought that it would be good to do this presentation to give you some ideas and help you to understand more about how we can mourn with those who mourn. Okay, so just a little bit of background in case you don't know. 11 years ago, I lost my oldest son to a rare adrenal cancer, and he was 22 years old. And I had no idea what the grief experience was going to be like. I thought I would be just like crying all the time, but it wasn't like that for me. It was more of a, I certainly did cry a lot, but not like they show you in the movies, it was, it was a lot different than I expected. And it was pretty lonely a lot of the time too. So, anyway, I'm hoping that some of this information can help you. Since losing my son, I went on and I became a peer support mentor through the Grieve Well organization when we lived in Michigan, and I was trained to do that. And then I became an intern for them. And then I have gone on to get some other training, and I'm now a grief coach. So that's a little bit about me. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about what grief is. Okay, so it's experienced psychologically, socially, and physically. Okay, so it's not just showing the emotions. There's a lot more to it than that. And also, it's also a response to stress too. So just to keep that in mind. Okay, so grief is a continuing development which involves many changes over time. So if you talk to someone who's been grieving or going through a hard time, and when I'm referring to grieving, so a lot of this is connected to the grief that comes with death, but also there's a lot of other sorts of losses. And so much of this will apply to many, many losses. So keep that in mind as well. But the more difficult the loss, the more intense it will be. So if somebody is telling you, oh, I'm doing okay right now, don't expect that they're going to be doing okay next week or in 2 months. Especially like to keep in mind, like right at a funeral or right after someone has died, your body actually gives you kind of a little gift where you're a little bit numb and you can't think or do hardly anything, but it kind of makes it so you don't feel the full measure of pain. And that often comes a little bit later, and it's usually when people aren't there to help us much either. So just kind of keep that in mind, that after a little while, it can be a time when people may really need some help. Okay, so if this is getting covered up by your pictures, then you can click on the little thing for the participants and kind of hide it if you need to. But grief is natural and should be expected after loss. So that includes lots of losses. And grief is a reaction to all sorts of losses, including death. And I'd also like to mention that with COVID, there's lots and lots of losses that have come with COVID. Some of them have been more difficult than others. Some people have lost loved ones, others have lost jobs, others have maybe just lost social contacts or different things like that. So when you're feeling kind of off through this time, or members of your family might be, it's very likely that there's some grief related with the losses from COVID. And grief is unique because it's based on an individual's perception of the loss. So even if a family member has the same loss, it's not going to feel the same to everybody. Everyone's going to perceive it different, and the different relationships and dynamics all go into account, and even just your personality. Okay, and so now I'm going to talk about different areas that are normal symptoms of grief. And I think usually most of us think about the emotional symptoms, which are, like crying spells, depression, anger and guilt can be in there. So it's not just sadness related things, but there can be other things that can be really, really difficult emotionally. And these are just a list of a few of them that are more common. So keep that in mind if you know someone who is grieving. Okay, so physical, which I didn't really think about physical symptoms when I was grieving, but it can really affect your appetite, your sleep. That was really hard for me. I lost quite a bit of weight, which was kind of nice to have that happen, actually. But it can affect you either way. And it's not really good when you're losing weight because you can't eat. So that's not really helpful. And another thing is, because of the strain of grief, it'll affect people's immune systems. And so they may be more likely to get sick. So mentally, people are really forgetful, poor concentration. They may have low productivity, different things like that. That really took me by surprise. And my husband also, the two of us, we felt like we couldn't really think for about a year. Unfortunately, my husband's manager was really very kind with his work, because it was hard for him to work for a long time. And so that's something to realize, that's a long-term thing that may happen, that it's hard to be able to be productive in ways that you would like to be. So spiritually, you may feel really lost or confused, and it's very common to have loss of faith. And I think when faith is an important part of your life, and then you see a loved one struggling with their faith and maybe doubting about having a God, realize that may really be part of grief, like if it's after a loss. And it might be better just to try not to make a big thing of it, but show them love and kindness as they're going through that, because they may really be struggling if it's been something important to them, and then that's become hard for them. And taking time can make a big difference. But it just kind of helps if you realize that when someone's going through that is very common. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about mourning. So a lot of times grief and mourning are used interchangeably, but they are different. So mourning is an outward expression of grief. So when you keep that in mind, and when we talk about mourning with those that mourn, then that's how we participate with them with their grief. I used to wonder about, how can I mourn with somebody who's mourning when I don't know how they feel, but we don't need to know how they feel. We can maybe try to imagine how they feel and think about that and ask them how they feel. But to mourn with them, we can participate with them through their grief journey. Oh, I forgot to say also, some examples of mourning would be having a funeral, wearing black. In the past, people used to wear armbands on their arms. Different cultures will have different traditions, or flying the flag at half-mast. Those are all examples of mourning. So people can have grief without mourning. So keep that in mind, that even if they're not showing mourning signs, it doesn't mean that they're not feeling grief. So when we talk about mourn with those who mourn, the word with is important. We want to be with somebody. Usually we don't think about with as being the important part of a phrase, but being there with them is really, really helpful. Okay, so we want to try to generally, when somebody's going through a hard time that we love and care for, we want to take that pain away from them. We want to try to fix it. And we may try to say things that we think is going to take their pain away from them, but it doesn't really work. When people are grieving, they have to go through their grief journey, and anything you say isn't going to take away their grief. It's still going to be there. So it's important that the things you say aren't things where you're trying to fix somebody. Instead, you want to focus on more like being a supporter. So here's some things about how not to be a fixer, okay? So it's best not to say, I know how you feel, because each person's situation is unique and no two losses are the same. And if you say that, it minimizes their pain. When our son died, our daughter's class, it was really sweet. She was in 5th grade and they all made these little cards and gave them to her. And we were looking at them and one of them said, I know just how you feel because my cat died. And my daughter, she's like, that's really sweet, but I don't think it's the same. and of course it was a child and it was a sweet thing to say. But we can say things to someone like, it was really hard for me when this happened. I'm sure that this must be really hard for you. Do you want to tell me what it's like? So it's okay to kind of mention that you've had some sort of a loss, but everyone's going to feel different. The second one is don't offer advice unless the person asks for it, and then be careful with how you give it, because people can get bombarded by advice, and generally, maybe what the right answer for you is may not be the right answer for them. So just be kind of careful about that. If you feel like you have something that can maybe be helpful, you can ask permission to share it with them and see if they say yes or not. But that gives them some control about whether or not they are going to hear it. And a lot of times people, if they're going through a really hard time, they can get overwhelmed really, really easily. Okay, the next is don't assume if someone understands the plan of salvation that they won't need to grieve. I remember when I was early in my marriage, there was a neighbor, this older man down the street whose wife died. And I remember saying something to him like, isn't it a blessing about the plan of salvation or something? I don't remember exactly what I said. It's been too long ago. But I just noticed that when I said that he really shut down. And then I knew it wasn't the right thing to say, but I didn't know what to say because we often hear things like that being said. As I'm saying that, though, realize that the person who's grieving may feel so, so grateful for the plan of salvation. They may feel so grateful for the help that the Savior's given to them in their life when they're grieving. And if they talk about that, then that's probably fine to them bring it up. But they may be struggling with wondering why God has given this to them. So just be kind of careful and take your cues from the person about what you might want to say about that. And then the last one on here is don't say things that begin with at least. It's not comforting and it minimizes the pain. So if you notice that you're starting to say at least, just, shut your mouth and try to say something else. Because I can't think of any instance where we could say at least that really is a helpful thing with that. But we may be thinking that in our heads. We may think, at least when this family was in an accident, at least the whole family didn't get killed. Or, you know what I mean? We may think some of those sorts of things and then we say them. But the important thing is that we don't want to be a fixer. And so we want to validate how they're feeling. Okay, so this is what I advocate for, is being a companion to someone. So calm means with, and pan means bread. So a companion would be like someone you would share a meal with, a friend or an equal. So kind of have that image in your mind. If you're having a friend over for dinner, you're not going to go and preach to them. Hopefully you're not going to go preach to them what they should do or tell them what they should do or make them feel, like something's wrong with them. When you're grieving, you may feel like you are kind of going crazy because it's such a difficult experience. So if you have someone telling you, I think maybe you're having mental health issues or whatever. I mean, sometimes that may be true for someone, but early on in a grief, that they're those are all just things that may look like mental health, if that makes sense. If it's been a really, really long time, that could be a mental health issue. But norm those things normally um, wouldn't be. So you don't want to be making people feel bad about themselves. You know, you want to treat them as equals, and you can try to talk to them about what their experience is like and have respect for them and be able to listen to maybe hard things that they might share. Okay, so being with someone who mourn, these are some ideas of things that we can do. Saying things like, I'm sorry for the pain and loss you're experiencing. Those are all good. And I think a lot of times we feel like if we say, oh, I am so sorry for your loss, that we shouldn't say that because it gets said a lot, but it's actually a good thing to say, especially if you don't know what else to say. Those are, that's a phrase that's positive. Um, Saying things like, I love you, or I'm thinking of you are helpful. And if I know they're religious, I will often say, I'm praying for you. But I try to be a little bit careful about that if they're not religious, because I don't want to make them feel worse. Um, if you have some good memories that you can share them with them. So when our son died, one of his scout leaders gave us some pictures that he had from scout camp. And that was really fun to get that because we had never seen those. And so that was kind of a special thing too, to do that. And then allow the griever to share their feelings, including anger at God without judgment. And another funny thing is when we're talking to people when they've lost somebody, we often say the loved one and we don't say their name. And you can have a whole long conversation without saying the person's name. So please feel comfortable to say their name, because I can guarantee you that that person who is mourning is thinking about that person a lot, and they're thinking about that person's name as well. And it's not going to be offensive to say their name. And if you don't know the person that died, it's totally fine to say, can you share, do you feel comfortable sharing what that person's name is? And then as you go on with your conversation, put the name in there, because it's part of their lives. This person is part of their lives. So another thing is help with meals or practical needs. I like to think about the phrase observe then serve, which was one of our Relief Society general presidents, I believe, did a talk about that. When people are first grieving, they often need a lot of help. I mean, sometimes they might not even remember to eat or different things like that. So they may need like help with their children. They may need help with yard work. They may need help with food. There could be any number of things that they might need. So finding ways to see what kind of things they need is really helpful right at first. And then later on, some of the needs that they might need are more emotional or social. Maybe they might really appreciate someone inviting them to go to lunch. Or if it's a new widow, taking them to an activity with them so they don't have to go alone. Some of those sorts of things can be really helpful for people down the road. So just try to follow that observe then serve rule and see kind of where they're at and what they might need. Okay, one of the biggest problems that we have is discomfort. So I want to share to not let your discomfort stop you from reaching out to those who are mourning. And people, when they are mourning, they often have fewer social contacts because people don't know what to say and do. And so it's a time when they may need to have more or deeper contacts, but a lot of people will step back because they are just so uncomfortable. And it's kind of an interesting thing when you share with someone what happened and they're like, oh, and they just don't know what to say. It's a hard thing. And I remember one time when after we moved to San Jose, we'd only been there for a few months, and there was a woman in our ward whose husband died after a very short illness, and she had 3 young sons. And after her funeral, she had all these people there at the funeral and helping her, and then she came back to Relief Society, and the Relief Society the person conducting Relief Society said, you know, we're so sorry about your loss. And then she said, well, why isn't anybody sitting by me? And nobody did. Nobody sat by her. And she was the type of person that just said what she thought. So, you know, then a couple of us went and sat by her. But I remember feeling like I saw her sitting there, and I remember thinking, I need to save a seat by her for someone else that knows her better, because I hadn't lived there very long. And I wasn't sure who her close friends were. I thought that's who should want to have sit by her. But maybe everyone else was thinking the same thing and were uncomfortable and they didn't sit by her. So those are just kind of some things to think about. Don't let your discomfort stop you. So when you see that happening, think of some way that you can reach out, even if it's a small way. There was somebody that died that lived by us in San Jose, a few houses down, and I had had one conversation with them. They mostly stayed in their house. So I knew who they were and I had talked to them, and if I saw them, I'd wave. But you know, I didn't feel very comfortable trying to reach out to them, but I just thought, well, I'll send them a card. And I just said, you know, I'm very sorry about that. This is from your neighbor 3 houses down. Anyway, I just felt kind of funny about it. But then when our son got cancer and then when he died, it really, really touched my heart when people that didn't know me very well reached out to us. And just getting a card really, really means a lot. In fact, I've still got all the cards that were sent to us. And every now and then I have gone through and looked at them. So don't feel like even something as small as maybe doing something like that is not helpful. Any sort of thing to let people know is, you know, is a positive thing to do. So sometimes maybe you have barriers that make it difficult to do that. So one thing that I started doing was having cards on hand. So I keep a supply of sympathy cards on hand, and I also keep like blank cards on hand so that I can send them to somebody if I want to reach out. And all I have to do is take the time to write it and find their address and get it delivered instead of having to go to the store. The more steps you have to do, the harder it might be to do that. And then another thing you could do is maybe role playing for things that are difficult. So like if maybe you're scared about talking to someone, maybe you could practice different things that you could say so it would become easier. Is there anybody who has ideas of what they do to overcome discomfort? I don't think I can see everyone. So if you have an idea, shout it out.
Melissa, I'm actually really glad you brought up the topic of discomfort, because I think that's something that tends to hold me back. I never know what to say, or I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. But I remember at a funeral, my mother tends to be the first to be there to help people in these difficult situations. So I always like follow her lead. And I remember in this one particular instance, there's a family, and they had lost their father, and my mother had made, and she had kept a hummingbird nest, and then she decorated it and she gave it to one of the kids. I think they were like a teen, and she had these beautiful words, and they were so touched by it. They said, I'm never gonna throw this away. It became like a keepsake. And I was like, wow, like I never would have thought of that. And my mother just never holds back. And I have that memory, like, it's not like the first thing you would think, like, oh, I'm gonna give them a hummingbird nest, but she made it meaningful to them and had these sweet words, and it became a keepsake for them.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's sweet. I guess that kind of also brings up the point to me that if you do give a gift or something to the person who's grieving, or maybe you give them money or anything like that, they may send you a thank you note, but then again, they may not. So don't go wondering, is this something that was good? Because they just might be too emotionally overwhelmed to respond to things. So just trust that your effort, that you gave it with love, and then let it go, and don't worrying about if it was helpful or not. Any other comments?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So this is Sarah. You can hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I can
Okay,
hear you.
sorry, I wasn't sure because my camera wasn't working. I think the way that I've overcome some of my discomfort with this is that I personally went through it, losing my dad when he was 57. It was kind of like he was in the bishopric, and it was out of the blue. It wasn't expected, but so many people, they got over their discomfort and they did so many amazing things that just having that memory and remembering, like one of the a friend from the ward did is she just came over with a basket of clean towels and took all the other clean towels out of our house. And my I was dating Danny at the time. He was on a mission, but his mother, like about a month later, sent flowers that just said, "I'm thinking of you." And there was another one that I totally just forgot. But when you've experienced it, so I guess can't really have it. Or if you hear of good ideas, you just remember that, and that's helped me get over my discomfort. Also, an institute teacher had given us like it was a writing, and it was basically talking about like a ship that was setting sail, and as it goes over the horizon, like we have a sadness in our heart, but on the other side there is someone else saying, "Oh, look, there she comes." And it was just, he was like, "Keep this because it's such a great thing for death." And I've shared that several times, people in and out of the church. So I actually have it in my scriptures. I just kept it from the time I was 18 years old. And so anyway, just remembering, writing that down, keeping it in your mind when you've been touched by other people, it makes it more comfortable when you're in that situation and need to reach out.
Yes, thank you. I'm reminded about somebody that I heard of that had gone through a loss, and I think somebody set this up for them, that they put like a bin on their porch, and then if the people needed anything, they wrote a note inside, and then people would come and check. And so if they needed something, like maybe they needed something from the store, then they just dropped it off in the bin, and then they didn't have to go to the door and things like that, because I guess the people didn't really want to have a bunch of people coming at the door. So I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, as a way to help. But thank you so much for sharing those thoughts, Sarah. That's really sweet. I love that one about the towels too.
Melissa, I have.
Yeah. Yes, Julia.
I never know what to say, but sometimes it helps me to just acknowledge that and to, call or visit someone and say, "I was thinking of you and I don't have anything great to share and I don't really know what to say, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking of you. And, do you want to visit? Do you want to talk? Can I bring you dinner?" Or, just, offer a few ideas of ways that I think I might be able to help, and just say, "I don't know what you need," but just acknowledging that, I don't know what to do, but I'm your friend and I love you.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect to say, "I don't know what to say or do," and you're letting yourself be vulnerable, and that breaks down barriers, when you do that. And so, also, if you are going through a difficult time and somebody asks you, it makes them feel better if they can find something, that they can do for you. So don't be afraid to tell people what you need when they ask. So
So
thank you.
I did have another quick thing. That one
Yeah.
of the hardest things, so we went back to college. It was my last semester, and everyone was like, "Oh, we're sorry." And like, it was a super emotional thing. And they were there for us for about 2 weeks. And then everyone goes on, right? Life goes on. And it was almost like they wanted to stop hearing about it. But that's like your life. And so I think just being there and asking about them, and being there, because we really still wanted to talk. And so I've even just told people that I know it's so hard, and I know, especially the longer it goes on, that other people move on and they forget. But if you ever want to talk about this person, just know that I'm here to listen to you. And that's really been helpful, that when I've had other friends through the years, that when they lost their dad or another one that lost their mom, just letting them know that I'm always here to hear it, because I know how it feels when everyone else has moved on and you still really feel like you need to talk about that person. So
Yeah.
anyway, just another thought.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I think listening is one of the best gifts you can give to someone. And when people have had a loss, whatever sort of loss it may be, they often need to process it through, and they have to tell their story over and over again. For those of you who have had children, I don't know if you've experienced it, but I always feel like I have to keep telling the birth story. and I think that's really common. The nurse is like, yeah, you have to do that because you have to process it, because it's this really traumatic thing that happened to your body, you know, that you went through, even though it's a happy thing. And so I always try to listen to birth stories too, because people, they need to process when we have these significant events. We need to process them. It takes a long time, and it takes a really long time often to get through grief or from death or divorce or different things like that. And people just need to listen or talk, you know, and then a good listener is really helpful.
Tell us your birth story.
I had 7 of them. We'll have to talk about that another time. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So here's some things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Is that you, Veronica?
Yeah, my mother wanted to share one comment, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I find out my husband passed away 3 years ago, and
Sorry.
thank you. And I find out very helpful some of the sisters offer to help me clean, because I kind of forgot a lot where things were, and to clean my refrigerator. And these sisters came and they say, what can we do for you? And then I say, no, everything's fine. But this one, she say, well, let me help you clean your kitchen. Maybe it's been a while, and I just want to be with you for a little bit, and let me help. And she started doing things in my kitchen and cleaning and all that. And I thought, I never thought, I forgot about that. So I really was grateful for this lady that offered me just to clean my kitchen. To me, the kitchen was okay, but I didn't realize how it wasn't care.
Yeah, you've got so much other stuff on your mind that you don't notice, kitchens and bathrooms and all those things, really.
Yeah.
That, well, kind of like the clean towels too that Sarah mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, any other comments, or should we talk about what to say? Okay, we'll go ahead and here's a list of some of the things that you can say, and I'm not going to say, read them all. You can read them as it's on the screen, but and some of them I kind of talked about before and some of the other times, but I mean, even just giving a hug can be helpful. I had a story of, well, when our son had cancer, so we were living in San Jose, and then we moved to Michigan for his treatments because they had specialists there. So one of the ladies in San Jose, she lived in my neighborhood, and I knew her a little bit, not really well, but I was talking to her about what happened, and her husband was a minister. And she said, Melissa, I want to pray for you, but I'm afraid I'm going to forget. So let's pray right now together. And so I thought, well, that's thanks for saying you're going to forget. But anyway, it was really sweet. So we were there in the driveway, and she wanted to hold my hand, and I was folding my arms, because we prayed a little different. But I still have that memory. It was a little bit awkward, but really sweet that she wanted to do that with me. And I would suggest that you don't say, if you're going to pray for someone, don't say, I'm going to forget about it. I don't think that's very positive. But anyway, it was a sweet gesture, that she kind of went out on a limb to do that. I mean, she knew I was a member of the church, and actually her husband is an anti-Mormon. And so anyway, it was all, it was just really sweet that she had done that. So anyway, here's some ideas for things that you can say. I think Julia, the one that says, I wish I had the right words, just know I care, kind of reminds me of what you were talking about, that we don't always know what to say. Okay, but I wanted to leave you with something positive before we got into what not to say. So here's a whole bunch of things, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but they're kind of like phrases and then how the grieving person might think about that phrase. And notice that there's some that say at least on here, so pay attention to that. And some of them that maybe that at least is implied. So I think like when we say things where it was God's will, everything happens for a reason, that doesn't sit well with some people, even if they are religious, because they may be really struggling with that at the time. When our son, when he passed away, one of my nephews had lost his father, maybe 10 years before. And he stopped going to church around that time. And I didn't know why he had stopped, but when our son died, then he told his mom, and he was an adult, and he said, well, to my sister, he said, now I know that there really isn't a God, because our son had received blessings that he would have healing, as did his father. And so even though he was raised with the church, that was something that he couldn't accept anymore because of the great grief that he had had. So I'm just going to add on to a little bit about that, because I have talked to quite a few people who have said that their loved one had a blessing that they would be healed, and then they died. And our son, I think he had like 3 people who gave him blessings like that, and one of them was our stake president. And our stake president had come to visit us when it was ward conference time, and he wanted to give him a blessing, and he felt the strong prompting to tell him he would be healed. And he had a really hard time because he remembered that blessing, and then our son died. And it was hard for us at first because we had wondered about that. And we were talking to the hospice social worker, and she said to me, she said, what does healing mean to you? And so I got thinking about that. And as I was thinking about it, I realized the ultimate healing comes after this life. And then when I got to realize that in my mind, that our son really was, he was healed free from his body that was racked with cancer, and that he was now at a place where he was healed from everything in mortality. So I just kind of wanted to share that, of how a lot of times people in the church go through that. And as our son died, we had several people who were very strong in the church who told us that they went through that sort of experience. And so we usually don't want to say we're struggling with our faith, or, we don't necessarily want people to know, but I think it is really very common. I think another one is God never gives us more than we can handle. See, that one doesn't feel very good if you say that to someone, because they may be falling apart, and then they'll feel like, well, I guess I'm not a faithful, worthy person, right? Because I can't handle this. So those are all things that can be kind of difficult for people to hear. Any comments about any of these things?
Yeah, I have a comment. This is Heather Palmer. So my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, lost their little girl last March. She was almost 2, and she died of a brain tumor suddenly. Like they discovered it, and she died within 3 days. Like that's how fast.
Wow.
And so she's been grieving, and she grieves a lot through social media, and she'll post things. And oftentimes I don't know what to say, but recently, this was just a week ago, she says, I'm sitting in front of Home Depot for the last 20 minutes on how I'm going to go in. I find myself paralyzed to go into places. I fight myself to go into these places. It's so hard. Last week at Walmart, I left my cart and walked out with my son, and I didn't even finish getting what I needed. This is my new normal. This is my new anxiety. This is my new grief that I deal with often. Please be patient with me while I work on making it to events, activities like church. So I I love her so much. And oftentimes I don't know what to say. So I just say, I love you. That's all
Yeah.
that's the only comment I make. But is that pretty common to just, because part of me was like, maybe she needs to, I mean, I don't know. I was like, maybe she needs to go on anxiety medication, but maybe this is just part of her grieving and we just need to
Yeah.
keep loving her. I don't know. That's why I'm
What,
putting this out
how
there.
long ago did you say it was?
It was in March, so it was
Okay.
probably about 6 months ago.
Yeah. So she may be feeling a lot of those things for at least a year or longer.
And that's pretty normal for grief.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. So some people, there's different ways that people grieve. And so there's those who will be very open with their grief, which it sounds like she is, to those who are really closed off. And some people, well, and so that's why it's hard to know how you'd feel. Like maybe if you were grieving, you wouldn't put it all over on social media like that, right? Because it's maybe not your personality. But if it's her personality, that's how she's doing that. And she's probably just wanting people to recognize that she's having a hard time.
Right.
So if you're saying I love you or whatever, then I think that's helping her to feel like people are there for her.
Okay. That's what I was wondering. One, if this is, because my first thought was maybe I need to help her get some help, but then I thought, no, maybe this is normal. I don't know. So
it does take a really long time. And so a lot of people, they'll just stop saying anything because they'll get negative reactions to it.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most common thing is people are just like, I'm not going to talk about it anymore, and then they keep it inside. So people that are maybe like your sister-in-law, they probably are ones who might be more likely to want to be in a support group or things like that.
Okay.
And there are groups like that even on Facebook that people will do, but she probably, that's her way of dealing with it. On the other end, which often happens with men, just so you know, is when they're grieving, sometimes you don't think they're grieving. So they may be doing a project or something. And that's how they're working out their grief. So maybe a way to reach out to them is help them do their project. And just realize that. And it can cause conflict within family. If like one spouse, like if they've lost a child or something, one spouse is crying and having a really hard time, the other one is looking like they don't even care and they're going off and doing a project. But it's a different way of showing grief. Right. So when my mom died, my dad was doing projects like right after. And so I knew that's how he was. He was just a person that liked to do projects. And so I was there and I was trying to help him do his projects. And even as she was dying, we were working on some projects together, that we were doing. And it seemed like that was helping him a lot because he couldn't do it by himself. He didn't have the strength to do some of the hammering or things. So he wanted other people to help him. And so we did. We helped. We cleaned out a closet and we put a new carpet in there, and we just did like things like that. And I think it really helped him because he had wanted to do it for so long, and it was a way to work through some of that grief. But to an outsider, that may have looked really weird that we were doing that.
There is something that I've also learned, and I've seen through my own time that I've had grief, and then with other friends and some that I've read, that grief is like, if you can imagine, kind of like ocean waves, that sometimes it's just so small, like when you're standing on a seashore, it's so small and it's still like the water's there present and you can handle it, and then you can just get hit by it out of the blue by something. The grief will hit you huge and you're somewhere and you can't handle it, and you just have to you just do what you can to get through that moment until you can breathe again, and it goes back down. And so it just to me, that really, I could really understand that analogy, is that it's like the waves that are just going to come. And if you sit back and watch, that sounds so familiar with what she's talking about. Like she's doing regular life things and all of a sudden she just has to be done. You just have to go and take your time.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, I like that. I'm actually going to share that with her. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Another analogy that can be really helpful for someone who's grieving is we want grief to look like you're at point A and you want to go in a straight line to point B, that now you're back to normal. And that's not how it works. It's more like a great big scribble. So if you if you remember that, because you hear people talk about steps of grief and things, and there are kind of different stages people do go through, but they'll go back and forth, and sometimes they're doing fine, and then they spiral back and whatnot. So if you think about it being like a great big scribble and how your life is totally out of order, and you lose control over a lot of things because of the grief. So okay, so thanks for all those comments. Okay, so I wanted to talk just for a minute about writing a sympathy card, because this is something that's really kind of difficult for a lot of people. So, or at least it has been for me. I think it is difficult for a lot of people. And I think I told you about that time when I did a sympathy card for the neighbor. So just giving a sympathy card and signing it is a good step, but if you do write a personal message inside, then it's more meaningful and significant to the person. So so if you can't think of anything to write and you just sign your name, don't feel bad about doing that, because that's a lot better than doing nothing. But if you're able to go a step further, these are some ideas. So you can share good memories about the deceased and use their name when you're writing about it. And a lot of people that I've given sympathy cards to, I haven't known, like maybe their parent died or something and I never knew them. So you can write about something like, I know that your father was so important to you and this must be really hard for you. Or you could say something like, I think that your parents really helped you to be a kind and loving person, and I'm sure that that was a wonderful legacy that your father left, or different things like that. You can try to think about things maybe that your friend has told you about their loved one or something like that, and try to bring those to mind. I actually have one time I went through all of our sympathy cards and I pulled out some of the best ones. And one of the best ones that we had was from a childhood friend that our son had, and we had moved like 2 different times since then. So he was 22 when he died, and he knew we were in elementary school. But she actually, this girl wrote memories that she had from him from back then. It was really sweet, that she did that. And then another one that was really very kind was from the medical people at the cancer center that our son was at. They sent us a card, and each person, well, I don't remember if they all did this, but several of the people, they said things that they had noticed about him, even though maybe they were just the nurse that came in just a little bit, but they'd say things like, he had such a fighting spirit. He was, such a great example to us, or, things like that. And that was really meaningful to me, because they were there for us at a really traumatic time in our lives. And then they shared those things with us. Another thing is, if you can follow through, offer specific support. It's probably best not to offer support if you really don't think you can. So then I wrote some things not to do, like don't rehash the tragedy. Hopefully we're not doing that, but sometimes we just don't know what to say. And so then we kind of go into this weird mode where we might do some of these things. And again, being careful the phrases that you use, and remember to try not to fix their pain. Don't try to find the perfect phrase that you think is going to bring them all this peace, because the important thing is that you're just trying to be with them and just support them and be there walking alongside them as they're going through their pain. So let me stop sharing. Okay. Oh, I think we have one thing on the chat here. Let's see. Oh, okay. Oh, is that from you, Sarah?
Yes, and I was actually typing a little bit more. So this is the poem that
Okay.
I was given, but I always leave out the last line that says, "and this is dying." I always just have left with "here she comes." But there have been 2 times that after I've given this, like put it in a card, that the person has come back to me a couple years later and asked for it because they had someone that they wanted to give it to. So I had given it to them in their loss, and they were like, where did you find that? Can you give it to me? Because like they didn't know where it was. And so I mean, to me, it was, I just think it's beautiful and it's touching, and it was something that has worked for me to put into cards and
Yeah,
share with others.
that's really nice. So if you don't know, you can go down and click on the 3 dots in the chat, and you can save that. And then you don't have to copy and paste and show it in the folder. So I just copied it for me. So anyway, yeah, feel free to copy that. So I have a handout that I has some of this information on it, and it also has some ideas for different types of loss, like for things like divorce or unemployment or infertility or miscarriage or things like that. Well, I can see if I can load it on here. Well, looks like it has to be in OneDrive. It's not in OneDrive right now. So Julia, can I send it to you and have you send it out? Okay. Okay, so I'll do that and have Julia send it out. And then you can pull it out if you're needing to write a sympathy card or you know, when you're trying to refresh on what you should do to try to reach out to someone. So anyway, any other comments on anything?
Melissa, I thought it was interesting you sharing how sometimes men might grieve, you know, through a project. I'm curious, do you know how do children usually show their grief?
Oh, depending on what their ages are, they'll show it in different ways. So like maybe a child who was sleeping through the night stops sleeping through the night, or maybe a child starts wetting their bed. I mean, that can even happen for older children too. Teenagers may have issues and such. So I do have kind of a little handout that shows for different developmental ages that I can maybe send that to Julia if you want as well.
That would be great.
About how that happens. But one thing I would like to say too is that the children need to grieve again over and over as they get to different developmental stages. So like if they lost someone when they were 5, they're gonna grieve at that stage, but as they gain more awareness later, they're going to go through it at different times. And so it's good for parents to realize that those times might come. We've had several of our children that when they were like older teenagers and young adults that started having a hard time with grief. And we took our daughter to a counselor, and she told us that when they get to around the age when somebody died, within like maybe 5 years either way, a lot of times they'll start having a really hard time. And so we saw that for 3 of our kids, that they did have a lot of issues. And I mean, like when I say issues, like they couldn't figure out what was going on because they were like mourning these things. And one of our daughters, she started wanting to have pictures up of our son around the house. And so she did a little project where she was framing all these pictures and hanging them up. You know, so she needed that then, even though it had been like, 5 years or so after he had died.
So can I share a couple things?
Yes.
So again, my dad was 57, so we had a lot of young grandkids, and the 2 that were 3 that had been really close and seen him on a daily basis, they started playing funeral with their stuffed animals. And it's like they had seen it, and they would have one that would lay down and all the other ones would go by and kiss him, and then they'd move by. And like we just let them do that and would talk about it and then process it. But I also lost an aunt when I was in 5th grade. She was her oldest was a year older than me. Then she had one that was my age, and she had 6 kids. And it scared me, and I didn't talk about it, and I have hardly talked about it. But throughout my life, then I went to the library soon after this happened, and I saw a book that said When Parents Die. And I'm like, oh, I wanted to get it, and I couldn't pick it up, and I couldn't read it. My whole life, I was scared of that until she died at 38.
Wow.
Sorry. And it was
That was
after I was 38. Like I had a
Hmm.
fear of turning
Interesting.
38.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to be in tune,
Mm-hmm.
because I would go in, sorry, I didn't know I'd be so emotional. I would go in to my parents' bedroom and just watch them breathe.
Mm.
Because it's like, if she could die, they could die.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, these things, they still feel like, I think I'm definitely in a better place now. But like, these are things that grief pops up over years, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's the aunt that lived just down the road from me that was amazing, that was all of a sudden gone. So it's really good to be in tune and help your kids mourn through those years. Because like I said, I was still being affected at 38 years old
Mm-hmm.
when I was like, I just want to get past 38, just because I don't, I knew what it
Yeah.
was, for her to die. So anyways, those
Yeah.
were just
Thank
my
you for
thoughts on
sharing
children.
that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think another thing to realize with children is making sure that you're having an atmosphere in your home where they can just say whatever they want to, about the death. Because some people, they try not to talk about it, and then the kids will just hold it inside for a really, really long time.
I think my family was open, but I was almost
Mm-hmm.
afraid if I said something, then it meant it could happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think it's good to, like you said, to just I think we're better too about being on top of things and,
Mm-hmm.
mental health and psychology and stuff than
Yeah.
in earlier times. But anyway, those were just some thoughts that, like, it can affect, like you were saying, kids
Mm-hmm.
through years.
Yeah. I have some little cards. I'll show you one of them. It's called Bright Spots. It's a memory garden card, but I think this idea can be helpful for like a family with children. So like they're kind of sitting around, and this one says, my family is, and then people can just say what it feels like. And, if they've got a missing loved one, they can just talk about it, so it just has like these little prompts that are easy for children, or like for the holidays. And maybe it's going to bring up conversations with children that they wouldn't even talk about normally. You know what I mean? It can bring it forward. So there's a like one that says, I will always remember. But as a family, you could just kind of go through something like that regularly, where you're having little conversations that something may come up. So anyway, so thanks for asking about children, because we certainly didn't talk about that part of it. But yeah, I'll go ahead and do my little handout for that too. I think it might be separated by age ranges, so there might be like 3 of them or something. But okay, any other questions or comments? Well, I hope that everyone's feeling a little bit more comfortable about mourning with those that mourn. And I'm really grateful that I could share that with you. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Melissa. You are incredibly knowledgeable. And it's interesting because the first time you mentioned doing this, I was so excited, because these are things that we don't talk about very often. And I think that's probably why it's so uncomfortable for many. And how sad that we let the discomfort hold us back. And I find this so very helpful, especially like, we always try to find ways to be there for our ministering sisters, and I think sometimes this could be one of the more difficult ways, but you've definitely given us some tools that are very, very helpful. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Wonderful subject.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So I guess we will wrap up there. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you very much, Melissa, for imparting some knowledge and wisdom, and thank you very much, Sister Palmer, for helping us with Zoom. And I wish everybody a good night.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Good night.
Bye,
night.
everybody.
Bye.